partnerships is actually a really, really important part of keeping the sector going and actually driving the sector forward. It's not just a quick fix.
So that's very much the way we look at doing businesses, is to create that partnership relationship, that trust.
For us, it's all about going into those relationships with your eyes open about what everybody wants to achieve.
You've got a whole range or spectrum of where you go to in partnership. At one end, we're in an industry that's, every bit of it's quite adversarial.
House builders that wouldn't look to do partnerships are now approaching us at earlier stages and saying, do you want to look at this scheme together?
As a build-to-rent specialist, we come at the partnerships model through an interesting lens.
The market that build-to-rent single-family providers will corner is that sort of middle ground, and I think that's an important message to deliver to government.
There's a lot to play for with, particularly as we look into the next election. We've got to have an honest conversation as a country of recognising housing, how it interlinks as an infrastructure piece.
Having lots of different housing tenures on a site, which makes it sustainable. With the balanced community on there, that's what, we all want, and that's where people want to live, isn't it?
It's a lot of hard work making a partnership successful. The longer the relationship and the more you do, the better it gets.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining. So I'll just set the scene a little bit, and then we'll get cracking with some questions, if that's all right. So I think fair to say that it's a slightly tricky time at the moment. It's a slightly tricky market. Inflation, obviously, is proving to be very stubborn. Interest rates, hopefully they'll hold again today, but they are causing challenges in the funding market, which is obviously impacting the UK as a whole, but our sector especially, I think, and acutely. So I think suggestion is that the number of homes that are going to be built this year could well be the lowest level for around a decade, which is slightly depressing. But it's not surprising on that basis. We're seeing consolidation amongst entrants and players in the market. And as we'll talk about today, partnerships is actually a really, really important part of keeping the sector going and actually driving the sector forward. It's not just a quick fix to the problem, it's actually a solution sort of longer term. So one of the key partnerships and one of the leading partnerships, I think, is the Vistry, Countryside and Sigma partnership. Obviously, Vistry have committed to the partnerships model. They merged with Countryside back end of last year, and they've announced this year that they're also committed to merging their private house building business into the partnerships model. So I think what we were hoping, Gwyn, kick off with you, if that's all right, is just to talk about your partnership and why that BTR model is working so well with Vistry Countryside.
Well, I'll probably take you back to 2013, 2013 really, when it kicked off. Like all things, I'd like to say we planned it all out perfectly and it worked beautifully, but reality was probably more chance than anything else. Reality about this situation we found ourselves in then. We bought a business called In Partnership at that point, became Sigma In Partnership, and they had relationships with 3 councils where we particularly had a kind of an agreement with Liverpool, Solihull and Salford. In Salford and Liverpool, the principal partner in that house building was Countryside Northwest at that time. And that initially just established that relationship, that partnership. So at that point when we took that over, there was all for sale kind of element, but we kind of looked at, well, how can we actually increase delivery of units, because it was another interest. And at that point we looked at that and we said, well, we looked at ways of maybe creating more stock by doing interest deals with councils or local authorities or housing associations. And but that was quite tricky at that time due to various issues with relation to how you actually get a deal actually stack up against the kind of institutional value where my kind of backer comes in investing. And the housing association, obviously tick 10 boxes, you always tick 9, and the 10th box just killed it. So we kind of looked at, well, how can we do that in a way was create our own direct stock to the market and raise money. And that's really where we started. Our relationship with Countryside was fundamental to that. Absolutely. In fact, they were kind of one of the people saying to us, actually we get 5 people coming to buy a house. 3 of them, 4 of them want you to rent a house, but we don't rent houses. So actually there's definite market out there, that you can do this. So that's kind of how it kind of kicked off. So that's how we ended up where we are. As I said, a great plan, and effectively it just moved from there. And we just then formed the first portfolio, which successful portfolio, which has been traded twice, and then UKAA, we raised money with Gatehouse Bank and everything else. And we kind of look at the whole thing as, it is a partnership model. It's not just a partnership with house builders, it's a partnership with the money we raise, it's a partnership with our letting partners, our management partners. It's all a partnership business, and we just sit in the kind of the middle and the glue that puts it all together, really. Comes to the ideas, I suppose. But the house builders is absolutely fundamental to that thing, and working with them to create. And with Countryside at that point, we had a kind of partner who was very aligned. I mean, you think back, it's not the same as now, but at that point, 2013, the market was also quite difficult, and they were looking for ways where they could actually increase stock. So it's not the same, but it has got similarities in some sense, and that's kind of where it started. And then we obviously Vistry, when they bought Countryside, we got that relationship. But we already had a relationship with Vistry previously, and we've got now other relationships, other different house builders in different locations. In Scotland, we've got Stringfield. Although it's not with Scotland, that's take another hour. We that's very much the way we do business. So we work with Lovell in Scotland as well. As numerous other Ongie, we work with Keepmoat then split off to become Ongie. So that's very much the way we look at doing business is to create that partnership relationship, that trust, and hopefully that works both ways to create opportunities for us and them.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Georgina. If I can come to you from the house builder perspective as well, just to give us sort of the Barrett view on the partnership model and how that's evolving within your business.
Well, partnering is really important for us. I'm the partnerships director, so I would be saying that.
Absolutely.
So it's the best thing, yeah. But no, it's hugely important for us. And, we work with people like, we do a lot with ABRI, in terms of your role as a housing association, in terms of delivering affordable. We've got 29 divisional offices. We were just talking about that earlier, weren't we? And, for us, it's about, Scotland, Wales and England. And it's about pushing that partnership model out so we're consistent in our delivery, in our approach, what we're looking to do. Because as Barrett, we do have those regional and local relationships with RPs. And I think there's probably about 3 or 4 divisions that probably work with you. We've got divisions who are talking to Jonathan at the moment in terms of that. We're trying to do some with Sigma, and we're doing a lot with Citra as well in terms of a PRS model. So for us, it's all about, going into those relationships with your eyes open about what everybody wants to achieve. And we were just talking about that earlier. It's always about, okay, so you're our customer. What is it that you're looking for? And you as a customer will be slightly different than ABRI. So it's understanding those and having that trust and that relationship that goes into that, to make sure that, one size does not fit all. And I know it's said a lot, but it really doesn't. And in different places in the country, we'll deal with the local people, and sometimes we'll deal with people on a national level. We're doing a lot with L&G Affordable Homes, and it's a relationship that's worked well over the past few years for us, and it's important. But we do work with smaller RPs, medium-sized, and the same with the PRS. So it's, in fact, I had a partnerships conference yesterday, where all of our divisions were in attendance, and all of our land teams, talking about that message and that consistent approach, and about how we work with those people to understand ambitions, priorities, but more importantly now, and probably not taking anything away from what you might say later, it's the constraints that face, the affordable housing delivery partners, with all of the things, the damp and mould, decarbonisation, rent reviews, all of these things. So it's understanding how we can still work together to deliver in a partnership model, something that works for the associations who are diverting money, and rightly so, to their existing homes and their existing customers. So it's a challenging time, and having worked for an RP years ago, I understand that I think it's probably the most difficult time for RPs as well. Don't know what your thought is on that, but I think normally we're very resilient, but now there's a lot of things that are coming your way, and so we need to understand how we can deliver our more affordable in terms of additionality, and the other models that we'll talk about here today.
Thanks. Yeah, I was going to follow up that I know that you signed a deal with the Barrett London team, have signed a deal with Transport for London, actually in Acton, to deliver 900 homes, half of which, 50% of which I think are meant to be affordable.
We've got a really good relationship with TfL. It's obviously a tender process, so it's we go in and you'll find out what they're looking for. And I think the last one that we got through was through a competitive dialogue. which takes a lot more time, but everybody sits around the table to understand. So we were in with TfL and their team, and then so did the person who was on the other side. So it's really, really important for us, and it's not, it's about the third or fourth very recent one that we've done with them. We're on building, and we find those relationships really, really important for us in terms of what we deliver and what we can do. And having that partnership approach also means that you share in the risk, the responsibility, the upside, everything that goes with that. But teams, expert teams. London is challenging to delivering, to just build, not anything else that goes with it, but just to physically build. And a lot of the TfL ones, can be quite challenging sites in that. So it really takes that competitive dialogue to work together to find a solution to build. Houses, I'm not saying it's easy, it's slightly easier, but to deliver apartments in smaller spaces. And one of our priorities is health and safety, a huge driver for us. So, we work closely with TfL on that. So, yeah, hopefully it's a relationship that will continue to grow for us because it's worked really, really well on the sites that we're on with them.
Excellent. Thank you. Nick, can I bring you in at that point? Because, again, I think an interesting dimension, and Sam, I'll be back to you in a minute on some of the things that Georgina had said, but an interesting dimension and slight diversion almost is the commercial angle and the partnerships with commercial organisations, so like TfL. And Nick, I think you guys have done a deal with Tesco as well. I'd be interested just to hear a bit more about that one.
Yeah, so this is a development in Lewisham, so it's an existing Tesco store. So there's quite a lot of examples of that in London around just repurposing land and things like that. I suppose, my observations, I never really think of it as what I would call a partnership. And I mean this in the sense that, you've got a whole range or spectrum of where you go to in partnership. At one end, we're in an industry that's, every bit of it's quite adversarial. So one end is just transactional business, buy a bit of land, argue on planning, then we'll have a bust up on construction, and then we'll decide what the financing, and then who's standing at the end gets the spoils, sort of a model. And then I think what you're talking about here is what I would call a sort of relationship type sector, where you're bringing parties together who've got a mutual interest, but I'm not sure that necessarily means a partnership.
So obviously, Abri, we're hearing from Georgina, have partnered with a number of the house builders, Countryside, Lovell, Barretts, and others. And I know you've announced recently Silver Homes. Can you just tell us a little bit about how the market is for you guys at the moment, how you're finding it?
Abri, part of our success is we're flexible in all the sort of deals that we do. The deals that we love most are the more collaborative deals. So working with repeat relationships, so like Countryside, Vistry, Bovis, Linden, we've got all manner of deals with those guys, but the ones that we like the best are our corporate JVs. So we set up an LLP, a 50-50 share, but we deliver the scheme together. And they're our favourite ones because we do the 106 affordable. Not necessarily all of it. Sometimes we'll have preemption if it's a bigger scheme, like 500 or 600 units. But essentially we're there from the beginning, influencing the design, helping to create the community, having a say in, do you slow down, do you speed up, taking additionality, putting in grant funding into it to help it. But ultimately putting in the new community, the extra stuff that you may not see on a typical kind of purely house builder led scheme. So that's the kind of JV side of it. The package deals, as I say, the Mike's with Vistry and Countryside, and I was saying to you guys earlier, we've got quite a lot on of them, almost getting to that point of we need to spread the load a bit more. It's you get to know what each other wants. So that's kind of spiel bit over. That's not the question you asked. So what's the market doing at the moment? It's really tough. Georgina mentioned it, we're getting pulled from pillar to post, competing investment demands, dampen mold and the like, and political kind of persuasion for RP customers to take any issue up with their RP, their housing association. So it's increasing the amount of people which are putting forward complaints. You've also got a tricky environment between the regulator and the ombudsman. There's a lot of pressure on housing associations at the moment, and therefore there's a lot of, and quite rightly so, I mean, one of our 10 objectives is be top 10 for customer care, but there's massive influence on RPs diverting money which may have gone into development into making sure that properties are as best as they can be. So it means that there's less money to go around for development, but
To less homes.
less homes ultimately, and it's that balancing act. And I think we're quite lucky at Avery. We're still buying. Some of our peers have just either pulled out of the market or significantly reduced their programs. Like for me, my treasury colleagues kept a tight rein on me when we could potentially be buying more. But what that's meant is we still got money in the coffers now to be able to develop, but also maintain our homes and invest into making sure that carbon credentials are coming up as well. So it's a tough environment. Shared ownership is still flying out the door. There's a massive demand for shared ownership. Rent, there's always a demand for rent. I mean, I came from a house builder background, and one of the first things that struck me as bizarre when I started with what was Radiant, now Avery, is the different sort of questions that were asked. Can you take a site for board approval? So is there demand for this affordable housing? I thought it was a crazy question, because yes, there is. But every site that we look at, we go to the local authority and say, what do you need? So we like to work in partnership with the local authority as well. We like to try and provide the homes that the local communities need. We also have, I mentioned Homes England, so we're a strategic partner with Homes England as well. So we have a requirement to deliver certain tenures as well. But what we try and do is work with all of our partners, house building partners, Homes England, local authority, and the community to deliver the tenures that people need. So the open market side, because we're exposed to open market sales as well as part of our JVs. And luckily, most of our JVs are operating quite well. Some of the higher end stuff is a bit tricky. But essentially, we are now getting more opportunities because the open market is trickier than the affordable market. So typically, house builders that wouldn't look to do partnerships are now approaching us at earlier stages and saying, do you want to look at this scheme together? Do you want to do it as a full package deal? So essentially, we work together. We buy the site on behalf of the contractor or house builder. So we're putting our cash in, and then they are doing the planning, but we're involved with the planning as well. We get planning, they build it for us. So it's not as big a return as you might get from an open market sale, but they've got more guaranteed that the market's there, the end user's there, there's going to be a sale. But then you bring build cost inflation in. So you can't counteract the build cost inflation against the rising sales market. So in summary, it's tricky.
Tough.
It's really tricky,
Still tough.
but there's a lot of opportunities.
Indeed. And interesting what you say about the rental market, because John, I was going to ask you to just tell us a little bit about what package living are doing in the build to rent space as well at the moment and how that's all going.
So, yeah, I mean, we, as a build to rent specialist, we come up with the partnerships model through an interesting lens, because we are a developer in our kind of DNA. So we do that which the house builders do. We buy land, often unconditionally. We take planning risk, development, delivery risk. When we launched, and we do that specifically, or for the most part, in what we call multifamily, so flats, apartments, city centre, rental housing to you and I. When we expanded our shtick into single family housing, we realised quickly that we couldn't repeat that trick. We couldn't buy land as competitively as house builders, and we certainly couldn't build them or deliver them as efficiently. So we kind of alighted on this word partnerships because it was we still believe it's the most efficient means of allocating our capital. We're not necessarily that interested in the development model because we really just want to own and operate houses for rent, aka income and capital growth. So it's a good time to do what we do at the moment without stating the obvious, because house builders, if sales rates have gone from 1 a week, and George, you'll be able to correct me on these statistics, to say, I don't know, 0.5 as a national average, people that look like us become quite attractive because we are a legitimate outlet for house builders who are in the business of building and selling homes, whether that's to owner occupiers or for rent. So in contrast to that kind of fall in sales rates, be it because of elevated rates of mortgage finance or whatever it is, then stacked up against that is rental growth. So we are in a world where less people can afford to buy, ergo more people rent, and buying houses from house builders, which we then supply that product back into the market for a rental tenure, is growing exponentially, albeit from a very slow base. So I think it will become a feature of the housing landscape, and specifically the partnerships model as a means of delivering rental housing across the UK. So no longer just confined to city centres where the kind of the growth of the build-to-rent sector originated. I think that single family as a sector will by far and away eclipse the scale of the multi-family sector, simply because there are an almost infinite number of locations throughout the UK where it's entirely appropriate to develop, deliver 100, 200 plus homes, whereas the multifamily market is constrained to probably 6 to 8, 10 kind of towns and cities throughout the UK. So yeah, we're at the foothills of what could be a exciting growth sector, and something that sits neatly alongside. It's not an either or. I don't think that the current hiatus in building to sell to owner occupiers, that game's not over, and interest rates will come down. Help to Buy 2 will probably come back in, or whatever stimulus product there is to kind of G up the market will people will always want to own housing. It's just that there's an increasing number of people for whom they might not be able to afford, or it's not the right economic decision for them to buy a house, and therefore having a viable, professionally managed, well-run, well-specified rental product seems to me to be incumbent on us as developers and investors and operators, something that the rental consumer deserves.
Thanks. So we're hearing around the table that for certainly the people in the room anyway, the partnership model is alive and well. Theo, Rachel, I was just going to ask you to sort of chip in, if you would, on the sort of messaging that you're hearing from your respective memberships about the partnerships model, and is it here to stay, and is it growing in the way that Jonathan is suggesting?
Well, it's so
No.
I think no, yeah.
Ronald, strikingly.
I think the current model, given all the headwinds in the broader housing sector, that sort of partnership model, I think, the current delivery rates are unlikely to stay when, like Jonathan says, when interest rates come down. So I think the market that build-to-rent single-family providers will corner is that sort of middle ground, and I think that's an important message to deliver to government. It's around that sort of in-between, not quite, lower end sort of affordable area, but not the sort of higher end for sale model. So it's that middle ground, and that's what we're trying to sort of target, particularly in our messaging to government around sort of key worker housing, etc. So I do think there's kind of long-term challenges in that sense of delivering at this sort of scale. But I think what we will see is, like Jonathan mentioned, it increasingly getting a stronger sector, more of a base building, and that whole pipeline growing. So I do think there is definitely a future. On multifamily, though, I still think that will remain a key priority, and I think that's where government wants to see build to rent growing. It's that those sort of inner city brownfield sites. We all know that isn't the solution, but it's a key thing that they'll be pushing, and they see it as like an opportunity in urban areas. I think one of the things that I will highlight from what we're hearing on the government side is
there is challenges to how they understand build to rent coming into this space. It's important to clarify that it's not kind of competing with home ownership. They often see it as, buying up and not accelerating delivery, not offering true additionality. So that's a real challenge, is how we highlight that in the right manner, and how we basically explain the sector. We've already sort of mentioned all these different tenure and partnership model types. I think it can get quite difficult and confusing for government and wider stakeholders to understand that. Some of our work at the local level, talking to sort of local authority representatives, has also shown a bit of confusion, a little bit of distrust of BTR, particularly in terms of affordable delivery. So, they essentially think that governments could go, investors might shed assets and no longer have that affordable provision. Obviously, you can point to, government staying for a long stead. But I think the traditional model with RPs is still preferred and providing through that model. So I think with just like build to rent, with the onset maybe 10 years ago, there's still lots of education to do, and I think that's what we'll be pushing for ahead of the next election.
Thanks. Rachel?
I think I was just doing some reading ahead of this, and I was struck by some of the stats on the finance modelling, and I think ultimately that's the heart of why partnerships are so important, because we know there's a huge amount of housing need and that's growing, but grant rates have obviously massively dropped off, and there's no sign, even with the change of government, that you'd be seeing a lot more taxpayer money basically going into boosting affordable housing, because the money's not there, is it? And I was we produced something called the UK Housing Review. I'll plug that as a resource you might want to look at, and reading that, the regulator estimates grant covers just 6% of capital costs in all new affordable housing. I mean, that's really stark, isn't it? And a recent report from the NAO said grant covers just 24% of costs for grant assisted schemes, 46% covered by debt. So it just shows how important this partnership working is and will need to be going forward, because the latest affordable housing programme has got, I think, over 50% of grant going into private subsidy. A new government, if it was Labour, might look at a different mix of that, but ultimately there's not enough money for given the current climate, but for all the reasons you've also outlined in terms of the money that needs to be invested in existing stock, and there's just more challenges coming down the road on that. So I think there is a job around education. I think you're absolutely right that there is perhaps a reluctance in certain parts of particularly the social housing sector around, is this what are people's motivations around coming into this, perhaps some nervousness around for profit. But I think recognising that there's a lot we can do working together, education is a part of that. But there's some really strong examples out there. I suppose the one note of caution is some of the models are not necessarily speaking, and I understand there's profit pressures, but not necessarily going to be addressing that lower income demand, and that is growing. So for as long as we have local housing allowance capped at 2020 rates, see with the Chancellor does anything about that in the upcoming autumn statement, that divide between what you could be getting from housing benefit support, the actual cost of market rents or affordable rents is a much bigger challenge for people, and we're seeing that tipping over, as we've seen in media coverage this week, into ultimately rising homelessness, rising numbers in temporary accommodation, and an awful lot of money that is being spent on effectively a sticking plaster solution for councils ultimately potentially going bankrupt in trying to find temporary accommodation responses. So I think there's a lot to play for with, particularly as we look into the next election and thinking about what some of the, how some of the current money might be spent and reconfigured. If that's not going too far off your question.
No, not at all. Not at all. Thank you.
Could I just come in to some of those points?
Of course.
Let's not forget that on the majority of sites where affordable housing is delivered, there is no grant that goes into it. So, and from what you were speaking about earlier, and this is something that we've raised with Homes England and the GLA, is that RPs aren't bidding on them. So the affordable housing, you know, in terms of delivering it straightforward, nothing else, no additionality, no bells and whistles. Like you said, that some people have shut up shop and said, come back to us in 2 years. We're finishing off our programme. You only have to read in the press that they're all slashing their development programmes. You know, they're putting their money into different things and responding to that, and probably increasing sometimes their customer care teams because of the things that are going into the Ombudsman. And so we, as an industry, and this is like talking to my peers as well, so this isn't just a Barrett view, this is you know, from looking at that, you know, are looking to try and find partners that to deliver our standard affordable housing. And some of the grant programmes have led other registered providers into doing their own land-led schemes. And in doing that, more time, effort, investment, additionality. So the straightforward Section 106 sites aren't being taken up by people. So people will have to go in and renegotiate with local authorities and look at different things. So that the grant that's sitting outside that programme with the GLA or Homes England is looking for additionality. But the question is, what about the ones that we're meant to be delivering, let alone the additionality that goes with it from that viewpoint? And I think from our point, you know, PRS build to rent, whatever you want to call it, sits in a different part. Yeah. So when you're looking at, you know, if history and that we're here, you know, it's sort of like 3 parts. You know, you've got PRS, more affordable, private, and so you know, it's another wing. It shouldn't be competing. Local authorities shouldn't be saying that there's any issues there with that as a model, because it's about actually bringing sites forward for development, working in that model, and actually, you know, building out quicker and accelerating that delivery because you've got people to buy these homes. But the affordable piece is really concerning. From that viewpoint, and this is nationally as well, in terms of delivery, because if we can't deal with our standard, you don't got to call it standard section housing, but you know, just you know, Section 106 without that additionality, and you know, the registered providers have gone back in, have got a resettlement from Homes England, you know, different, maybe it's, you know, it's obviously all confidentially sales, but it could be different grant rates, high grant rates delivering less because actually, you know, it's so expensive now to look to do that. But that's a real big issue in terms of accelerating and dealing with that. And so when you have got people like Sigma or Packaged or the others that are out there saying, well, you know, we'll continue to purchase and these are really good models, you know, it helps, you know, continue with those sites. But there's bigger issues just sitting around the corner that, you know, no grant goes into these Section 106 ones. So what do we do and how do we deliver? But that's just an industry, you know, if you talk to if there's anybody else around this table who, you know, we sort of share those roundtable discussions as well, they would be saying the same thing.
I think that's it. Yeah, I definitely see that from a Section 106 point of view. And I think Theo's point about the local authority lack of understanding of all those different pressures, and they genuinely don't understand the whole Homes England grant funding. It can be counted as Section 106. Every time with the local authority, you're trying to educate them and explain it to them, but you're talking to a different housing officer each time. I get there's lack of resource on the local authority side, but there's a real lack of understanding as well about those things, and their agreements are very standard, and it's really hard to persuade them to shift and to see things in a different light.
And that's why it's important when we're going in for planning to work with our RP partners so that the right house type mix is provided. Because, you know, we could come to, you know, and go, oh, we've got this house, and you'd be like, no, we can't do those because of that, and this doesn't work for our model, or not in this area. But a local authority would be like, well, that's what we're looking for. And so, you know, a lot of the time people will turn it down because of what's there. So we try and bring partners in to have a discussion to broker that. So it's not just us saying it, because we wouldn't build market housing that without doing a report, seeing what was needed in that area. You guys wouldn't be going,
no?
You
know what I mean? Exactly. Saying we need to get involved in what we want. I mean, I'll give you a classic example where frustration from me, and you see, you talk about the kind of local authorities' education. Yes, you trust as well. They don't trust you. So that's where add us to the problem. But you know, we did Sheffield Council with Sheffield Partnership and with Ongi, and we built houses, and because minimum space standards of 2-bed house at that time had to be, I can't remember, 770 square feet or something like that, which we generally bid about 660 square feet, 2-bed houses on the whole, you know, and they're perfectly fine, by the way. They actually work really well, but you had to build it. Well, that costs more money, obviously. It takes more area, help densities down. You're therefore the only way around is you charge more rent. At that time, actually, the rent ceiling point we looked at that one, that's actually too high. You know, we almost charge the same price for a 3-bed house to for a 2-bed house as well. We didn't build any 2-bed houses. We ended up building 2-bed houses. That's actually a failure to supply what the market wants. And that's a lack of understanding on that authority to actually say, you know, that's just wrong. I actually think minimum space housing is a classic example where actually someone's actually going to look at it and be like, actually, fundamentally look at what you need. We just need houses, decent, good quality houses. Stop being so utopian that we need something which is perfect. Well, let's be some common sense of prevail.
I was going to ask if there's any policy or regulatory frameworks that we thought we might want to encourage. You've all beaten me to it. I mean, do we think there's any specific tools, any ways? I mean, one for the floor really, that we could actually better support and drive some of this regeneration?
Isn't it a question of priorities? I mean, it's like all things. Until you put it as number one priority, it won't get solved. If we wanted to solve the housing crisis, we could, no doubt about it. But you have to put it as number one or number two priority, and it depends where you put in the priority. I agree with you. There's no other in the car industry, for example. You never hear government telling the car industry, "I want a car with 5 wheels," or whatever they want. Let's loose to build houses. Yeah. We will, or whatever you wanted. But then take away every time you put a constraint in there, and every time you put a risk in there or try and pass risk over it, it just grinds everything to a halt.
And is that back to policy? Is that back to lobbying? How do we change that? How do we open that out?
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
And I think there is some room for optimism in the sense that Labour very clearly came out very strongly on housing, didn't it? It was if not its number one, very much up there with we're setting our stall out, we're going to go for it, we're going to tackle the kind of the NIMBYs, so to speak. We're going to face into issues around opposition because we can see the need and we've got to push through that. And I think talking about a new towns programme is ambitious. Obviously we've done it before, there's lessons to be learned, but recognising we need to go beyond kind of infill and start to go on a bigger scale if we want to really address it. I think that's really positive. Without getting too political, on the other side, there was not much to be said at Conservative conference. There was at both, and it was noticeable difference in the thinking that was happening for what would happen if Labour came in and the detail of how some of these issues would be worked through. Because it's easy to say it, isn't it? It's another matter altogether to do it. But we have done it before, and as you say, post Second World War, the two main parties were competing for who could build the most houses. There is an issue of quality. I think there's a scale and speed, and then making sure we're building homes that are going to be fit for the future, and that comes at a price, doesn't it? We've seen what happens when we don't invest in regen, homes that are built not necessarily to last for now, people are still living in them, and then we've got loads of issues of people living in poor quality housing because it's beyond it's sell by date, so to speak. And we've got to have an honest conversation as a country about that, haven't we? And I think some of that is around the education of recognising housing, how it interlinks as an infrastructure piece. So, if you haven't got a secure, safe home, you can't do well at school. People can't afford to live in an area, then you're not going to have enough key workers. I think we need to get beyond housing and absolutely kind of work more in partnership to make that case so that housing is seen in the same way that the National Health Service is seen as something that needs to be invested in. So does housing. But housing, transport, education, they should be fundamental building blocks. And actually a recent report from the HBF shows that people are really looking to politicians to be doing something on this. They recognise the crisis, they blame politicians for not doing more, and that identifying it as a deciding factor at the next election. So I think there's scope for this to be having more conversation, but ultimately I think we're only going to move the dial if whoever's the next government recognises the state has a big role to play and has got to find some money, and that doesn't have to necessarily be all grant. This comes back to the partnership point, I think, around bringing in private finance and doing that in a way that works for everybody.
That post-war house building that you spoke about, that was the government who was essentially in the business of building houses, and since then, they've outsourced housing, shelter, arguably, pretty high up there with the NHS and education, to the private sector, who, for well-rehearsed reasons, struggle to deliver the volume of housing that the nation needs. It would require enormous structural reform. So, what's the joke? If you don't know the name, if you know the name of the housing minister, chances are you're him or her. How many have we had in the last 10 years? It's in double figures, and it's not a cabinet position, so it's not important. It's changed too often. Whoever's in that seat doesn't get a chance to kind of affect real change. So I think that position needs elevating. I also think because it takes, use the car analogy, right? It takes a lot less time to kind of push a car down the factory line than it does build a house or, you know, a big master planned community, we live in kind of 5-year political cycles. So it would take cross-party agreement, which is in short supply right now, and probably take, you know, 2 administrations or 3 administrations, you know, 10, 15 years of consensus to execute whatever the business plan was. To outside of kind of fundamentally unpicking our kind of political structure, I think it's a difficult challenge to solve.
One thing though that I think, you know, is perhaps more achievable is thinking about rent policy, which has a massive impact. I think you touched on it, you know, the rent cap that means people don't know. It's really hard obviously to plan. You don't have that independent credibility as an investor to know, you know, what kind of return you're going to get. There's an interesting piece in Inside Housing, if anyone that looks at it, from Matthew Bells, who used to work at the regulator and is now a CEO at Paradigm, talking about the need for that to be moved out from it being effectively government-led decision for whoever's in control, and perhaps sitting with the regulator, so that there's an independence and an assurance around that process. I think
Bank of England.
a lot. You know, that could make quite a big difference and is relatively easy to do.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I'd echo everything Rachel said about highlighting it, and you know, we do have a positive opportunity, you know, particularly if Labour were to come in. It sounds like they're very much working within the current planning system, and they're going to try and pick in the first 5 years as many low-hanging fruit as they can, which makes sense, and that's what we'll have to try and help enable, is to get those easy wins. You know, evolution, not revolution, I think, in the first term, probably maybe looking to greater planning changes in the next 10 to 15 years. So unfortunately, some of the solutions cost a lot of money. It's around that grant funding, coming from this perspective of BPF for affordable housing in terms of FRPs and the like. The easier thing is that stability. You know, what investors crave more than anything else is that stability, and that, you know, will reduce the cost overall. Having that stability that will make it more attractive, will increase investment, and will hopefully increase the additionality in the houses being built. So it's about them coming in early and establishing clear rental pathways and making sure that, you know, those numbers stack up and that they're in it for the long term and they don't react suddenly to economic changes, etc. And that can unlock a huge wall of capital which hasn't been realised yet. So that, yeah, I think that's some of the key messaging that we'll have to put forward.
Thanks, everybody. So I think, yeah, as we started, still pretty challenging and likely to remain so. But obviously the relationships that everybody around the room has been talking about are fundamental to keeping us on the right track in the meantime, and hopefully, you know, benefiting from the political will, if indeed it evolves, to drive it on. But I guess even the relationships we've talked about can be a little bit challenging. I think you talked about a sort of marriage analogy. Andrew, I was going to ask you, I mean, I think there are some challenges in these partnership relationships at times. I was just going to ask you to sort of just tell us a little bit about about what you've seen.
Yeah, sure. But I guess it is a partnership, it's a relationship, and like any marriage, you've really got to work at it, as we all probably know. And it's interesting hearing Nick talk about the adversarial side of it and Sam talking about collaborating. It's a lot of hard work making a partnership successful. And I think what you've got as well is sometimes like different push and pulls from the two partners. It's the same in any partnership. And you've got the ultimate end user, perhaps fixed on delivery, timing, but for the larger, maybe developer, PLC, bringing sites, getting them ready for development takes a lot of work. Priorities can change within those organizations. They've got a lot of sites to deliver, and timing can be affected, and I think that's frustrating at times for the end user. But it's about working at it together and about collaborating. I think, and we've touched on this as well, the longer the relationship and the more you do, the better it gets. So it's about working on that. I think, you know, Sigma and Countryside are a good example of that. They fit into place, you get to know each other, and it works really well. but sometimes there are different tensions, and that's what you've got to work out.
Agreed.
I think another challenge actually is market challenges, and I appreciate that Sigma, you've been at it a long time, Gwyn, 10 years or more. It appears like it's a moment right now where everybody's focusing on partnerships because we're in a difficult market. I do wonder when the kind of retail market comes about, when we're selling privately, will we have a focus from the developers on the partnerships as much as they're focusing on them now?
You will, because as Jonathan said, it's really kind of the only way to do single family housing.
Yeah.
I agree. Multi-family is slightly different, where you're doing bespoke developments. But we're not doing bespoke developments. It's pretty bog standard housing. That's the way it works. So I think as a kind of realization, that's the best way to make it work. I mean, I agree. It really, seeing as a partnership is you're right. It's not the strict end of the word, is it? I mean, a partnership is, we got partnership.
Well, I was just using that for example, but your 50-50 joint venture, the only point of conflict when you actually analyse it is probably the land value going in.
Yeah.
Everything else is shown.
It's evolving, so I think it's going through the gears. Certainly when we got into the sector, we identified people with the word partnerships in their title. It felt like that was a kind of expansive use of that word. It was very much, we're in receive mode, here's an opportunity, do you want it? There's 10 others that want it too. There's a bidding process, it's competitive. That's fine, that's, market dynamics. How that's evolved now, at least from where our business model is, we're doing more repeat business with limited number of partners, so very much similar to what Sigma did with Countryside, where there is more, if not risk sharing, then it's more you understand each other, there's a relationship, you have an agreed set of documents, the whole process is more efficient. And then where I think that will evolve to, or at least I hope, is joint ventures and legitimate risk sharing, where it's not a competitive process anymore. It's two parties agreeing a kind of a joint endeavor. Everyone knows what each other's roles and responsibilities are. But for that to happen at a scale requires at least institutional capital to go up the risk curve a little bit more. Because then the biggest challenge in the sector is mistrust of each other and changing market dynamics. The thing I hear, the biggest complaint I hear from house builders is you guys always change your minds, or you're not there for us when we need you, and that is legitimate in some circumstances. So I think it would require, working with each other earlier stage, further up the risk curve to develop kind of true partnerships. Otherwise, it will always remain quite transactional.
No, come back on one of the points that you said in terms of partnerships for now and not later. Well, at Barrett, we've always been involved in partnerships. We've got a huge relationship with Homes England and all of the things it was called about before that. We purchased a lot of sites through them through obviously competitive process, but we work hugely collaboratively with them, with TfL as well. So these are some of our big partners. We go in and work with local authorities, and we may look to purchase a site, and then we'll go in and talk about our sustainability credentials, and they're like, well, can we do these things? So what was a site that would have been still really good has suddenly bumped up because they know that what we can bring in and what we can deliver. So for us and working with people like Sigma and Package, that is just will be the norm, because that's what that you'll do. And we've got a blip now, but we always wanted to increase the number of homes that we would build through various partnership routes. And that word, it isn't bandied around in Barrett as not meaning partnership, it really is. And I think it's all about building those up. And our senior leadership team take that really seriously as well from that viewpoint. So in terms of those relationships with Homes England, TfL, local authorities, we're in discussions looking at some Crown Estate sites as well, whether we'll be looking at, I'm not quite sure. But, it's all about those relationships and people looking for something slightly differently and not just doing it as the norm anymore. But equally not creating something so it's so wacky. And I've been around long enough that there's been plenty of designs of houses that have looked a bit interesting, because it's new technology. But we're in partnership with University of Salford, where we've built on their campus a Z house, which is to test all future homes technology, and also an energy house, which is really interesting because basically it's a house built in a warehouse. And we have got students from the university living in it and testing everything. So bless them, they're in a house, in a warehouse. But in that, it's all about testing really, really cold temperatures. So you can go there and it's freezing outside and snowing. in the warehouse, or it's boiling. And so with those, it's all about working with those people to move forward. And there's huge amounts of parts involved with that, about looking at how we move forward, what we're looking at. People still want a house to really look like a house. But how do we meet the challenges that government has set, moving forward? So it's really exciting, and we like to do that. And people may say that about PLCs. They'll do it now until the market hits, and they'll do something different. But actually, for longevity and keeping those relationships going and having lots of different housing tenures on a site, which makes it sustainable. With the balanced community on there, that's what we all want, and that's where people want to live, isn't it? Nobody wants just an over provision of one tenure on there. And when I worked at a housing association years ago, it was always about finding, you do need rent, you do need shared ownership, you might need a bit of discounted OMV, let's call them first home, you might need a bit of PRS. It's all about that diversity of bringing that in there. And RPs were great at doing that, with lots of different things. But at the moment, they're squeezed into going, do we have a bit of a development programme? And, looking after our existing customers because of lots of cost, inflation and rents coming down and all of those things. So it's a difficult market for us all, but we just need to navigate it together. We really do, to try and, get out the other end.
Yeah, I think that's, sorry, Thea.
So do we think long term, like there is a space for BTR, PRS?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think if you talk to most accountants, I mean, I'm talking to people here that deliver it, but it's not just a Barrett viewpoint. I'm sure you talk to anybody, they're like, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. I don't think there's any doubt. Well, if there isn't, I might as well pack up.
Get Gwen's coat.
So
we're out of jobs.
No, exactly. Yeah. Well, summer warmer. Yeah, look, there's no question. I think it's here to stay in some form, and it's just broadening. I think the advantage of it for the house builder perspective going forward. I think most people will pick up on it. It's still house builders who just want to build a house and sell it. That's just what they want to do. And that's absolutely fine. But we, the build to rent can cover many things, which I think, small sites. We've done sites 26 units. That does not suit many people. We can do that. We can have we have a relationship with councils, which as house builders don't have that relationship with councils. We can help facilitate that. We have relationships with Homes England because they're involved in stuff. We can facilitate an awful lot of things and help going through processes. So I think there's a lot of benefits in there. House, talking about relationships, we work with the countryside, and the first person worked with a guy called Ian Kelly, and Ian Kelly had left and from Kellan Homes. Well, guess what? We work with Kellan Homes now. Those relationships do last because he understands how that works. I don't think there's any doubt it will only get bigger, frankly. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think you've got this kind of two spectrums of what you said, kind of relationship. You got kind of the one which is just literally somebody you bumped into at a conference and they need you to deal with, and at the other end you've got literal, genuine full-on partnership which has open book. Now, we're never going to be that. We're hopefully not that. We're somewhere in the middle and just trying to get a relationship where with someone sitting where actually there's a degree of trust. You're trying to work one-to-one when you possibly can. And it's not going to open book, but it's an understanding that, we understand you need to make profit, you need to make it work for you, and you work within those parameters. Acceptance, classic examples I can give it where we've done things like that, when you're sitting with 4 or 5 sites, and there's acceptance where we can't make that work, so that's got to be a bit less. We accept you maybe get a bit more on that one. And there's that kind of give and take going on. Or sites where we bid with 5 sites, countryside in Knowsley. There's 5 sites, 2 of them were joint, 2 for us, and 1 was for sale. They did not want to take all those 5 on. It didn't work for them as a for sale market, but it worked as combined. And it's getting that to kind of the advantages of actually working together.
And I don't know if I mentioned, we're working with Citra, so we've got a partnership with them where we do deliver. And again, it's on various different sites in different locations across the country. And it's all about that, those unique points that they need to reference for us to deliver. And it's a really successful partnership, and it is a true partnership in every sense in terms of delivery. And it works really well, and as you said, it's because we are doing that repeat work, it's really easy to get the next site, and actually then you have an extension of the first site you did with them because we're now a couple of years down the line, and all of those, so it works really well. And it's all about modelling different house types. So we could have some apartments, it could be some houses, it might be, they've got a minimum that they like because if it's in new areas, but actually if it's a really good site and then we've got something else nearby, then, you can bring those in. So, it works really, really well. And that was something that we've started, ahead of all of these headwinds, and will continue. So
Yeah, and that's how the market's evolving, isn't it? I think you've all beaten me to my almost wind-up question. Gosh, you're very good. But Sam, I was just going to bring you in on where we see the market going a little bit for your part of the sector.
So I mentioned the JVs earlier. I think the next step on the journey for us with our JVs is, and when we're talking about the large sites, kind of 500 unit ones, where you've got enough scale to get people interested, the next step is it actually a three-way JV? And there's a PRS term that's part of that. They're in it from the beginning. That part of the design, they've got that institutional money behind, which can help unlock some of that cash flow concern. So that's where our next kind of direction is for JVs, is trying to unlock some of these more complicated sites, great sites, but they've got some real infrastructure, heavy investment requirements. So 3 parties bearing the brunt of that cash, I think that's the way forward for us.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for your time. I was going to round it up with do we all think partnerships are part of the solution for the housing shortage? But I think I pretty much know. Then we've got a unanimous yes around the room. Just for me to say thank you so much for your time today and for your contribution. I think that's been really, really interesting, and it's a really exciting time to be part of the sector. So thank you all again for your time. Thanks very much.